Okay, today then we turn to the powers of Congress, and those are found in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution. And believe it or not, 18 clauses and only 27 expressed powers run the whole shebang of 300 million American people today. 18 clauses containing 27 expressed powers. Obviously, the country cannot run on 27 powers, so as we'll see, through a combination of constitutional and practical lawmaking maneuvers, there are, of course, thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of powers of Congress that are implied through the express powers, and we'll be getting to all that too so we can understand why. But first we'll be concentrating on the expressed ones themselves that are written down, that the framers were concerned enough through the failure of the Articles of Confederation, convinced that these are the ones that we needed to have. Actually, several of them are kind of arcane today because about 9 or 10 of them had to do nothing but military, and a lot of the military ones are sort of combined now, and like one of them has to do with controlling pirates on high seas, that for now, although that's still somewhat out there, is obviously an issue that's a little bit in the back burner. So some of the express powers have become somewhat antiquated and archaic, and even more why we need to have the unexpressed powers, the implied powers interpreted for us by the Supreme Court into the express powers so that we can run our modern country today. Now, if I were to ask most Americans what particular power upsets them the most, well, of course, most people complain about the power to tax, of which they do. Now, you may remember that the Articles of Confederation, they were not able to tax at all. It was unlimited. It was just felt that through tariffs alone or through states voluntarily upping money to be able to run the country, that they would be able to do that. The enlightened men, remember we've talked about them before, the enlightened men thought that they would be all wise and cooperative and realize that you had to have money to run the country, but not very realistic according to man's nature, and that didn't last very long before the states thought that other states were pulling their weight, and before you knew it, the country did not have revenue to run on. Obviously an unacceptable situation in a country that was at risk at the time, and even now today. It's unlimited. They could literally, if we wanted to, constitutionally have a completely socialistic government. We could, taxed 100%. I think it's fair to say the framers didn't think that that we would have to worry about that, or maybe they would have written that in, but for sure, taxing the amount that we tax today, they would have been surprised at, and I would not say that they would disagree with necessarily today once they realize the world that we live in. Let's not go that far, but we certainly would say they would be surprised and shocked, to say the least, which is why they wouldn't even begin. I'm sure not even Madison in his wildest dreams thought that we should limit the amount of that they would be able to tax. The taxing, as we'll see, is concurrent with states, and we're going to kind of combine those a little bit today because some are state tax, some are federal tax. And although we have seen some retrenchment this year federally and state-wise, growing each year. You know, even at best in the federal government, nobody's ever really talking about cutting the budget. They're just talking about cutting the annual increase of the budget for the inflation. Can you imagine that? Really, that's all. Even in the days of Ronald Reagan, we were talking about cutting government expenditures. We were cutting the increase in the yearly increase due to inflation. So that's what we're talking about. Because of inflation, we do get more money in every year through taxes and things like that, because money's worth less, and therefore the annual increases are in there. Those are the ones that are really that people are after. There are some limitations. The farmers wanted to make sure, the Southerners especially, that you could not tax exports, that they didn't want the North to begin to taxing exports, and the North didn't want to have their exports taxed after the imported things that they were trading. You cannot tax certified nonprofits like schools, charities, hospitals, universities, churches that can prove that they're actually religious and not some sort of entity that is just trying to get around taxing. And that can get fairly serious. I think, Bishop Lynn sits on 30 acres of land in East Dallas. The tax property on that land alone, I would imagine, would probably be several $100,000 a year that we don't have to pay because it's not taxed, because we're on a tax-free entity. take a place like St. Patrick's Church in the middle of Manhattan, and that 2 acres it sits on, telling how much that's worth, and that would be taxed. So no taxing on certified nonprofits, churches, schools, charities. Now let's look at see if we can at an average middle-class, middle-aged homeowner in Dallas, Texas who gambles, drinks, smokes, drives a gas-guzzling SUV, and occasionally visits a legal brothel in Las Vegas. In other words, a regular just guy, right, who lives in Lake Highlands. We're going to see how the tax bill adds up. And it ain't going to be pretty here as we see the way we get ya. And we're using this because although I am a average middle-class, middle-aged homeowner in Dallas who gambles and drinks but doesn't smoke, and don't drive a gas-guzzling SUV, and don't visit a legal brothel in Las Vegas, I am just a regular guy, and so a lot of these things that we're going to be looking at are things that do get me and are reflective of my life as a middle-class citizen. Let's have a look. First, there are direct taxes and there are indirect taxes. Direct taxes, nobody's trying to fool anybody. Here it is, boom. It's either the income tax or a sales receipt or something saying, here, we got you. Nobody's trying to fool anybody. And the very first biggest one, of course, is income tax that we pay every year. And we have graduated income tax in America. And the IRS comes and gets it. At the moment, the middle class is taxed at a 24% rate. Guys like me. Let's go back to property if we can just for a second. For the IRS right now, the top rate is 36%. And the lowest rate is at 15% right now. If you make a certain amount of money in America, you're not taxed at all. And that's a lot of Americans not taxed, period. And 38% again is the highest rate. And does that mean that that's what you pay? That I pay 24%, 1/4 of my income to the United States of America? Hardly, because the deductions through the IRS that are there are plenty. You're foolish if you don't learn them. They're complicated. You either hire somebody or you learn them yourselves. For instance, I don't know if you know this, but your loan are worth, I think it's $4,700 now. You're worth $4,700 to your parents as a dependent to them to take straight off their taxes. So that and a whole range of different things, it takes that 24%. We're nowhere near that we actually pay. As a satellite, when you hear the people talking about flat taxes, let's just tax everybody flat at 10%. That almost across the board, every plan would be without any more deductions, though. Okay, so it would be a flat 10%. There wouldn't be any more of these deductions for this, that, and the other thing. Okay, income tax, property tax. Okay, on top of that, there's my house over in Lake Highlands. I live in a little bit of a haunted house. You might come to it at Halloween. Actually, not my house. My house is not quite that scary and large. My house, though, is worth, do I have it here? My house is worth $340,000 a year. And so I pay $7,000 a year to the honor of living in Dallas and paying for the services that we get here. $7,000 a year on top of my income tax to live where I live. School tax. Although my kids go to RISD, and soon I won't have kids in, my kids go to private schools. They would go to RISD and to Lake Highlands High School. Soon they'll be gone. However, I do pay $2,300 a year now, RISD school tax, and so does everybody in every business that is in its boundaries for school tax. So we're looking at my 24% income tax without the deductions, the property tax, and the school tax. It's starting to add up, isn't it? Then we, of course, we have our sales tax for everything that we buy that's taxable. And right now, in most parts of Dallas County, it's a little higher, and some over in Arlington, but 8.25% is the sales tax on everything pretty much in Texas, except for medicine, food, and a couple other things. And of course, we have those tax-free weekends when clothing and other things are not taxed. But basically, 8.25% sales tax. That's quite a bit lower than some states. Pennsylvania, where I'm from, the sales tax is only 4%, and they don't tax clothing. And we're going to see in just a second how Pennsylvania could have a 4% tax and Texas an 8.25% tax, because Pennsylvania doesn't have a unicorn or a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. The money's got to come from somewhere, right? Nobody's fooling anybody. So if Pennsylvania has a lower sales tax than Texas, something else, revenue must be coming from somewhere else. So we'll see that in just a moment. There's still a luxury tax in this country. It's bygone days from the 80s. On boats and cars over a certain amount are taxed at 20%. I think cars over 100,000, boats over 200,000. Now, state income tax, which Texas does not have. About half the states in Texas in the United States do. Pennsylvania, for instance, there's a 6% income tax, and so there is not one in Texas. Thank goodness. But we do end up paying for that in a higher ways through both sales tax and some other sort of taxes that we have that are higher than other places. And again, we just want to make sure that when we talk about different taxes in states, you brag about this, that, and the other thing. I mean, the money's got to come from somewhere, and states expect services of one sort or the other, and the money's got to come somewhere. So those are the direct taxes. For a middle-class citizen, it adds up pretty quickly. But we're not done with that. Then we get to the indirect taxes, of which there are many, 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 many. And we're going to talk for a second what they are, how much they add up to, and just why exactly they're indirect instead of also being upfront with us about who's being hit with what. You may know that there's a cigarette tax. Those of you that smoke cigarettes may not know this, but a pack of Chesterfield that costs $8, half of that in Dallas County is tax. Okay? Half. So $4 of that goes to Philip Morris. $8 for that goes to the state, and you pay $8. Now, some states that's even higher. New York City, a pack of cigarettes now $12. That's how much the city and the state taxes is on top of it. Alcohol is also taxed at about 1/3. $7 6-pack of Corona costs about $2.80 in tax, state and federal tax. So it costs more, and it's not, again, on the sales receipt. It's not on the box. It's not on the bottle. It's just already embedded into it, and then the government goes and gets it from the people that sold it to you. Gambling is taxed generally at about 10%. So if you go out to the horse races like I like to do in the summer, and if I lose everything. And if I win $1,000, I only get 900 because they tax 10% of the winnings. And raise a good amount of money. That's why sometimes you see some people asking for full-scale casinos to be set up in Texas like they are in Louisiana and Oklahoma, because they do raise a ton of money at the state level for by taxing that. Prostitution where legal, which is basically Nevada. It's about the only old prostitution bordello I could find that was acceptable. But basically, the session costs about $400. It's taxed at 100%, so that's how much it'll cost you. Also, gasoline is now being charged at 47 cents a gallon in federal tax that you're paying. So whatever we're paying now, $2.50 a gallon right now, it really should be $2.10. The rest of it is embedded into the gasoline already. So what's up with all this stuff? Why? Why aren't they telling us about it? Why don't they just go ahead and tell us just like they do the other things, right? What's happening with these particular things that they want to embed them into the price? The reason? Well, in a Judeo-Christian country like we live in, the reason is sin. They're bad things, aren't they? And we really can't tell Americans under the First Amendment in a range of different ways that you can't do things, right? It's illegal, we tried that with alcohol, and we can't really tell people they can't buy expensive cars and things like that, and gasoline. So what they try and do is they try and make us do less of it by taxing it more, right? So let's go back to that if we can and just say, so for instance, if they tax cigarettes at $8 instead of $4, maybe some people will, instead of smoking a pack a day, will only smoke a half a pack. Instead of drinking a 6-pack a day, maybe they'll only drink 3, right? Instead of 2 sessions at the bordello in Nevada, they'll only have 1 session. And that is exactly what's behind gasoline. The price of gasoline and the price tax was originally justified by the idea, and the real idea, that people don't buy smaller cars until gas gets high. And we know that. We see that. We just saw this 2 years ago when we had the latest spike, and that's what this gas tax is all about. Not that it's a sin to drive around, or it's a sin to drive big cars, but it's also done for the very same reason as the other sin taxes, that trying to get the American people to do something less. And we've proven that the best way to do that is to make things expensive, and people will curtail and curb activities on a wide range of activities, not just the sin ones or gasoline as well. So that ends that. We'll pick up with the next one with some of the other powers.